founded Autism Discovery in July of 2022 to support individuals and families facing an autism diagnosis after childhood. And just recently, I founded Fine Tuning. We opened for business on May 1st. You will hear more about Fine Tuning and why I founded it toward the end of my words with you. So I am one of many autistic adults in the world. Just 5 years ago, however, I would not have been able to tell you that. My autism was not identified until I was 47 years old. Unidentified autism is more common than you may think, a reality which can lead to exacerbated, sometimes dire, mental health concerns in affected individuals. In my time with you today, I will try first to help you understand some of the challenges that come with being an autistic individual. Later, I will focus our attention on the alarming situation compounding the experience of female autistics in our world. Finally, I will strive to champion an attitude of positive change, one in which we all can play a formative role. Being autistic equates to fundamental differences in how we conceive, perceive, and interact with the rest of the world. As difficult as that may be, when autism is unrecognized and unidentified, the challenges understandably increase. As I experienced firsthand in my childhood, teens, and young adult life, not knowing you are autistic makes interacting with society painfully challenging, laden with traumatic judgment for simply living naturally, and full of what can feel like constantly being misunderstood. The life of any autistic is burdened by feelings of not being accepted for who we are, or when masking or covering is at play, of not even being seen as our real selves. It is also perpetually accented by unpredictable sensory onslaughts, which can be both painful and damaging to us. And all of those factors are, I propose, even worse when you don't even know that you are autistic and are completely unaware that your brain is simply wired differently than approximately 98% of the world. As we all know, rates of autism are increasing. This information is from the CDC in America's Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Study in 2018, and it reflects rates of autism in children 8 years old at the time, including information from 11 states, as well as which includes my own, New Jersey. So I only found out in preparing this presentation that federal tracking of autism rates only began in 2000. In 2000, the rate of autism in 8-year-old children was 1 in 150, which works out to a point of about 0.67%. By 2008, 1 in 88 children were diagnosed. And by 2021, 2021, the rate was 1 in 44. That is 2.2% of the population. 0.67%, a threefold increase in rates of diagnosis. Now, you would think that I'm happy. Rates of diagnosis are increasing. The problem is, when I look at these statistics, what I focus on are the people who were missed. Because there were still 1 in 36 1 in 40, which is the most recent 2023 data, 1 in 44 in 2021, I think is what I said.
Yeah.
There were still that many autistics, but only 1 in 150 were identified. So I mentioned that the federal government only began tracking these statistics in the year 2000, but California, they've always been progressive, and they were tracking them well in advance. So if you can, the next slide has 50 years of data, whereas the prior one only has 15 years of data. So if you can kind of remember what this slope looks like and realize that it's going to be condensed on the right-hand side of the screen. So the year 2000 is here in California. So not only have these rates increased recently when the federal government began tracking them in America, you can see how fewer and fewer people were recognized as autistic in the past. Because of prejudicial and out-of-date standards and evaluative techniques, many people who did not present in a limited, stereotypically autistic way were not even recommended for screenings decades ago. And I was one of these people. Even today, some practitioners are biased with assumptions about females and autism or any individual's ability to communicate or make eye contact. As we now know, autism is a spectrum, and it can present in very different ways in different people who all at their core share common autistic traits and challenges. Excuse me just a minute. Improved screenings for and recognition of autism after the childhood years are tremendously important so that all people who are autistic can be identified, as only then can they begin to receive appropriate and necessary supports. Only then can they begin to address the many challenges that are byproducts of being autistics in a society in which they are a small minority. And only then can they begin to find a more comfortable and happy place in the world where, because of their autistic qualities, they can too often be treated in ways which are unwelcoming and invalidating. Change in this adult realm of autism identification is vitally important. When I say vitally, I am implying that the matter is one of life and death. I am here to impress upon you today how that is absolutely the case. One of the clearest and saddest signs that life as an autistic person is hard are the elevated statistics surrounding suicidal ideation and suicide within the autistic population. Certainly, the most tragic outcome for anyone would be to get to the place where they consider ending their own life or act upon that thought. As several studies have chronicled, rates of suicide and suicidal ideation are stunningly high within the autistic community. The rates of suicide for all autistic individuals is about 10 times higher than in the general population. But here's where I want to begin to place the lens particularly on females. While in the general population, men are 4 times as likely than women to take their own lives, in the autistic population, women are almost twice as likely as men to do so. A large-scale study in 2020, completed by Tatja Hirvakovsky and colleagues, looked at 54,000 autistic individuals and compared them to over 2 million people in a control population. Their work led Ms. Kieberkowski, in fact, to determine autistic females have a higher risk for suicidal behaviors in almost all types of suicidal behaviors we analyzed. The risk for autistic females who also have ADHD is even more elevated. While 1 in 11 males with both conditions attempt suicide, for females, that number jumps to 1 in 5. The increased risk of suicide in autistic individuals is so well established, in fact, that in 2022, a team of researchers in England, led by Dr. Sarah Cassidy and Professor Simon Baron-Cohen, became the first to investigate evidence of autism and autistic traits in those who died by suicide. The team worked with coroners' offices in 2 separate regions of England, accessed records, and conducted interviews with next of kin to identify both known autism and evidence of autism and autistic traits in the deceased loved ones. Their findings: 41% of those who died by suicide had elevated autistic traits. As a reminder, the percentage of autistic individuals in the general population is somewhere between 1 and 2%. These figures underscore an urgent need for research and action to address these glaringly elevated risks in all autistic people. So far, I have put on the table the phenomenon of undiagnosed autism and added to it increased risks for autistic females. No person should have to navigate adolescence and adulthood unaware that they are autistic. But when the undiagnosed autistic individuals are female, I am here to assert, the situation gains extra complexities. Some of the statistics on suicide rates, which I just shared with you, certainly support that fact. Another supporting element is that studies show the situation is not just that autism is less frequently diagnosed in females. The bigger problem is that it is more easily actually missed. According to Carol Povey, the director of the Center for Autism at the National Autistic Society, recent research suggests that the number of males and females on the autism spectrum is far more equal than previous thought and current statistics suggest. Instead of the current ratio of male to female autistics of around 4 to 1, that ratio might be much closer to even. Alarmingly, researchers are revealing that current diagnostic standards and practices are simply unlikely to identify autism in girls. According to a 2017 study in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, the chances of having to navigate life as an autistic but undiagnosed individual are thus greater for females as compared to males. A separate reason to specialize our attention for a time on the female autistic population is that studies have repeatedly shown that, compared to males, females are more likely to suffer co-occurring mental health conditions, whether those be on top of or because of their autism. Aya Miss Rodgard and her research team calls that attention to the fact that within the autistic population, females are at disproportionately increased risk of other mental health conditions when compared to males. And they have called for studies to account for sex-based differences. A reframing of expectations for how autism presents in females can help prevent misdiagnoses. Females are not only more likely to be disregarded in screenings and diagnoses, they also are more likely to have received prior inaccurate diagnoses in attempts to account for their symptoms like depression and anxiety. Many have faced years of therapy or pharmaceutical intervention to address a mental disorder that doesn't exist. Some even being referred to inpatient treatment in institutional settings, only to later determine that they are autistic. Those who were misdiagnosed in the past can finally reclaim their lives through self-awareness and appropriate supports and accommodations, and for the first time can achieve an accurate assessment of their needs regarding education, employment, leisure, and social relationships. Another separate but often ignored reason underdiagnosis of autism in females is of special concern is because of the basic biological and physiological makeup of females. Menstruation, possible pregnancy, and inevitable perimenopause and menopause each lead to wide hormonal fluctuations that hold formidable sway over the course of a female's lifetime. Fluctuation in levels of serotonin, endorphins, dopamine, and estrogen impact brain chemistry, and due to inherent differences in autistic brains, are likely to affect autistic females differently. The well-known phenomena of premenstrual syndrome and the far more impactful premenstrual dysphoric disorder, in addition to postpartum or postnatal depression, all cause emotional dysregulation, which can be severe. Despite these realities, Jan Schleier and Jacqueline Burko have asserted the topic of hormonal influence on women with autism has received scant attention. And Rachel Mosley and colleagues note as recently as 2020, nothing is known about how autistic women handle the menopausal transition. Relative to the late diagnosis of autistic females, research I reviewed supports a scenario whereby some females are able to manage, mask, or cope with their autistic characteristics and symptoms all the way until reaching menopause, whereupon the onslaught of hormonal changes leaves them no longer able to do so, finally leading to a diagnosis. Clearly, the influence of hormonal variation on autistic females needs more attention. While certain noted factors are at play exclusively with females, make no mistake in what I am seeking to share with you today. Underdiagnosis of autism in all people, males, females, transgender individuals, and those who identify as non-binary, everyone, is a vital health concern and one which needs immediate attention. Research done in 2015 led Shiva Agarwal and Beth Angus to recommend that clinicians who mostly work with adolescents experiencing symptoms of anxiety and depression should receive regular training to improve the chances of autism being identified during early stages of treatment for those conditions. Anita Thapar and colleagues have also studied the prevalence of depression in people with autism. They confirmed the high prevalence of prior depression diagnoses among those who received late diagnoses of autism in adulthood. This research group acknowledges the likelihood of two distinct scenarios: autism having been misdiagnosed as depression earlier in people's lives, or evident depression symptoms masking underlying autism. Ms. Thapar and her colleagues admit, despite growing research on the links between autism and depression, there is relatively little to guide clinicians in practice. Even for those autistic individuals who have been identified, the current landscape poses tremendous challenges to a happy and fulfilled life. Researcher Daniel Gilmore and his colleagues go so far as to say that the healthcare system is unprepared to accommodate the unique needs of autistic adults and calls change of paramount importance. This serious need is due in part to the fact that all autistic individuals are more likely than the general population to have co-occurring mental health conditions. These researchers reviewed published literature from 2017 to 2022 and found that while over 50% of autistics use mental health services, this population of people is forced to manage with high rates of unmet mental health needs. Mental health providers who are untrained in working with autistic adults are unlikely to be able to best address their unique requirements and natures. In fact, treatments that are effective for a non-autistic majority population have been shown to be less or even ineffective for autistic people. Even more concerning, according to Gilmore and colleagues, these approaches may even be detrimental to autistic adults' mental health outcomes. So now is the time for the part of my talk urging specific action to help improve the risky landscape for autistic individuals. Specific recommendations made by Daniel Gilmore's team include the need for clinicians to collaborate with autistic patients in terms of their care. Of particular importance, given the alarming rates of suicide in autistic individuals, is the team's recommendations for clinicians to develop autism-specific crisis management plans. Other researchers whose work I reviewed have recommended that suicide prevention programs should be tailored to autistic people. And I will add that it is important that targeted suicide prevention reach not only those who are diagnosed, but also those who have autistic traits or tendencies, but no diagnosis. A broad, simple, and cost-free recommendation is for clinicians and mental health providers to become more educated about autism. General medical practitioners, school teachers, and college and university professors need to heed that call as well. With diagnostic methodology in recent past decades likely missing a good portion of autistic individuals, chances are that doctors' offices and schools are frequented by autistic young adults who have yet to be identified. These professionals, who are in regular, close contact with young people, are in the position to pick up on characteristics and behaviors which might be signs of autism. The possibility that a person is autistic needs to be far more readily on the radar of law enforcement personnel and first responders as well, especially when an innocent autistic individual may not communicate in the same ways as non-autistic individuals, and when sensory stimuli can be disturbing and reactions to them extreme. The misreading of either of these understandable situations in an autistic person who is confronted by law enforcement personnel is prone to be especially regrettable and tragic. As well, recognition within the entire medical community needs to increase regarding the wide variety in presentations that autism can take. Only once identification improves can those who are autistic then be properly supported, screened, and treated when necessary, given their greater risks of anxiety and depression. Only with proper identification of autism will young people and adults who suffer from depression and anxiety on top of their autism be able to be supported in a way that effectively addresses their complex needs. And only then can individuals who had been misdiagnosed with depression or anxiety, which was masking underlying autism, finally have their challenges properly identified and stop or avoid treatments, medications, or hospitalizations which are unnecessary. While I call upon meaningful change within the research community, from high school and university teachers, law enforcement and first responders, as well as clinicians and from the overall medical community, meaningful change can also start as simply as with you and me. Becoming informed about autism as parents, neighbors, colleagues, and friends, and helping others be aware of possible signs of previously unidentified autism in themselves or loved ones can be life-saving. Practicing basic human kindness throughout your days and checking in on people who might be in need are very important too. At the same time, appreciation needs to grow regarding the rare, wonderful, valuable gifts of insight, perception, problem solving, and more that autistic minds offer. A step toward that is destigmatization, and for autistic individuals to feel more comfortable being open about their autism. When that can happen, we will stop feeling encouraged or even required to mask or cover up our autistic tendencies when around others. In some of my professional roles, I was limited in my ability to proudly present myself as an autistic individual, and that prejudice needs to stop. Becoming aware of the scope of the problem of the underdiagnosis of autism in all people has led me to reinvent myself professionally. In order to free up time in the 9-to-5 work week to mentor and consult with autistic individuals, I am leaving high school teaching to open up Fine Tuning, a coaching enterprise for international professionals where I will help them polish their spoken and written English skills. Fine Tuning will also offer review and editing of materials translated into English. I will proudly begin to accept clients as of May 1st of this year. I am thrilled that I am launching an endeavor where my eye for both patterns and exceptions will be valuable to the people I work with, where my attention to intricacies and my desire for precision will not be seen as burdensome, and where I will no longer feel the need to squelch, silence, or be ashamed of these heightened traits in me. I wish the same for all autistic individuals, that they may find fulfillment in this life, which is well suited to their unique selves and provides them with happiness and purpose. But foremost, as I hope I have impressed upon you all today, it is my wish that all autistic individuals are recognized early enough in their lives so that their challenges and discomforts can be reduced, and so that their gifts and extraordinary qualities can be embraced and celebrated. To quote the great American singer-songwriter Sam Cooke, "What a wonderful world this would be." I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes?
So for fine tuning, what is your ideal client?
So I am a career high school English teacher, 28 years, and I am not an ESL teacher. So the clients that I will be working with are not ones who are learning English. Instead, their English skills are solid, even very solid, but maybe every once in a while there's a glitch. Maybe they, one of the things I like to do, merging my old self with my new self, is expand their vocabularies. One of the clients, I've worked with 3 clients pro bono in order to get myself ready. And I work with a woman in Brazil who does outreach with indigenous women and helps them gain income and find sources of income. And so she's been like eating up some of these vocabulary words that I teach her. We're up to about 30 or 40, kind of more precise adjectives and verbs that, you know, aren't the common ones. So yeah, people who need fine-tuning and not basic English skills. Yes?
Lara, being a mental health professional, you know, I always research stuff, but I'm curious, since you cited such a significant portion of female adult autism as being undiagnosed, what would be 3 or 4 common traits to look for that could suggest the possibility?
Speaking for myself and many females and women that I have interacted with that were not diagnosed until adulthood, ironically, hyperlexia, so early reading, a broad and wide and readily accessible vocabulary. I think needing to spend a lot of time alone. When you are able to cover up your autistic signs, and the reason we do so is not to fool anyone. When I was 5 and 10 and 20, I covered up my autistic signs just to make it through life. Because when I acted a certain way, I would sense the judgment and I would feel the negativity, and it felt awful. So little by little, I realized things that people didn't accept, and only through that constant sort of studying of interpersonal relations was I able to become a person that many people might not know is autistic unless I tell them. So when you do that, and when you're making your way through the world without knowing that you need more breaks, or that if a sound or smell is disturbing to you, it's okay to leave the room, any number of things. When you don't know that, and you try your best to act like everyone else, because why would you think you're any different, it's extremely exhausting. And so a deep need for that recovery time, which probably is going to be solo time, that might be something to look out for. I just had another one, but it's escaping me. Yes?
So, discussing that, would sometimes people that are now being diagnosed or characterized as highly sensitive people actually be autistic?
I think it's quite possible. I think the stigma surrounding autism is great. I am familiar with young people who seem to me to have autistic traits, and when they get checked out, they have received a diagnosis of ADHD, and it's happened maybe a dozen times. And I am wondering if it's possible that these young people, and maybe more importantly their parents, might, that diagnosis might be more palatable, might cause less of an uproar. I don't know. I think it's also possible that the diagnosing professional missed the autism because of all of the factors we considered. So being highly sensitive and having sensory issues with sensory stimulation is another kind of difference in some people, and it also, highly sensitive people also are sometimes highly empathetic. And that's another kind of, I believe, an ironic reality, that many autistics are extremely empathetic. And that's another thing that makes a female, well, forgive me, makes any autistic's day, if you are heightened in your empathy, you pick up on emotions from others and you take them in, and it makes for your own day to be pretty, well, yesterday, can somebody remind me what the social worker, I wrote it down because it's exactly what I'm referring to. She referred to when you take on the emotions of others and then you have to recover from it. It was a two-word phenomenon. Well, I'll check my notes. Yeah. So, So I think that there are many women who think they're doing a great job and maybe are tired at the end of the day. And in fact, like myself, I mean, I had no idea, not the faintest idea. And people ask me all the time, well, did you always suspect? I said, I didn't have a clue. And one of the things I say, which I think helps relay the pain involved, when I found out that I've been autistic all these years, and that's because this other thing, that's why that happened, and oh wait, that's what happened there. It feels like a big practical joke was played on me my whole entire life. And I just didn't know. Yeah. It's not that fun. So that's why I want things to change and people to be helped to be identified earlier. Yes?
Well, two things. One is that you really felt different because you can see that you had some needs that maybe others didn't, but then you were treated differently.
So the last part was that I was treated differently, and what beforehand?
Oh, is that in some areas you felt differently because
yes.
you knew that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I was treated differently. You can pick up on negativity. You can feel when you're not accepted and welcomed and embraced in that sense. You can feel it. And then, so what I did, because, I feel like I'm smart, I feel like I'm a survivor, I kind of just adapted to a bit of a loner's life, a bit of an outsider, and I did my own thing, and I became happy doing my own thing. And another interesting thing with women who might be on the spectrum and not realize it, I could only ever handle pretty much one friendship at a time. Because if I had a lot of friends, and another reason females and males who don't present stereotypically, another reason they can make it through to middle school or high school undiagnosed is because even though we have social challenges, social expectations in elementary school are fairly small, and parents do a lot of the arranging, and the teachers say, now make sure you include each other. But in middle school and high school, things get far more complex. So I would have a friend, but a friend at a time. And what I realized is I had learned her sense of humor. I had learned, okay, she gets annoyed when I do that. And so I was able to kind of act the ways that would not make me feel judged around her. Whereas if it were a bigger group, that was a lot of people to keep track of.
Yeah.
So maybe having smaller numbers of close friendships, especially in the past, might be something.
I have one more question.
Okay.
I'm just thinking a niche part of my mediation is to work with employees with medical conditions in the workplace. And so I've seen the presentation of so many things in the last 3 years that I've never seen in my 30 years. So my question is, because I'm thinking about one particular employee that also presents with some of the symptoms you're talking about, but also presents with migraines. Does migraines get involved? Okay. Thank you. You just answered the question.
Yeah.
She's diagnosed with ADHD.
So, I mean, to tell you how much so that is the case, you heard in my presentation about the proliferation of anxiety and depression. Fortunately, depression is not where my autism coincides with or has taken me, but anxiety most definitely is. Beginning at age 7, I had insomnia-induced panic attacks. 7 or 8-year-old freaking out because she can't fall asleep. Repeatedly. And my migraines began at age 12, and they did all sorts of tests to be sure that it wasn't anything more serious, and and it just grew from there.
One more question, I'm sorry, because this is really interesting for me. What current testing is now available given the research you presented in the vast the significant percentage of the population that go undiagnosed? What kind of testing or assessments?
Testing needs to change. Self-diagnosis is becoming much more accepted because now that the stigma is being reduced, now that people like myself are freely talking about it without shame, the more that happens, the more the internet is going to allow exchange of information. Self-diagnosis is becoming very common. I think, honestly, we have so much catching up to do. As the graph indicated, there are so many people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. And by then, as I think just makes sense, the covering up skills you become better at it, so it's even less visible. So I think that self-identification is probably the way it's going to have to be for people above 20 years old. And then maybe now we can start picking up the slack in these middle school and high school students and college students and catch them before they become full-fledged adults and give them the self-knowledge and the supports that they need. But I think for older adults, it's a big challenge. Yes?
So I have a nephew who's autistic, but he's totally been able to manage it, and he had care actually at 18 months. So he's gone to college now, and but his sister has been, she's overweight, she gets depressed, she, it's like all the things that you're talking about, and they couldn't figure out why she has this weight issue and low self-esteem. And I'm wondering.
So, my mother is definitely autistic, I think. She has not been evaluated. She's a little bit in denial, but very odd things she did when she raised my sister and me. For instance, she left me Friday morning. She went to work and she didn't come home till Sunday, and that was since I was 13 years old. I considered filing a report for neglect, but I just knew my mother would get in trouble, and I just managed on my own for those 3 days since I was 13 years old. So that and many other things, I think my mother is autistic. My sister is autistic. My daughter is autistic. It was only because my daughter was diagnosed at 15 years old, so late, that I realized if she's autistic, then I'm autistic, because we experience the world the same way. That's another reason why I didn't think there was anything different about me. Here I was, a single mother with my kid, and the two of us, we were so similar. So can you just say your question one more time? Because
just with my
my
knees.
So the knees, and the thing is that I succeeded, so to speak, and was able to achieve like professional stability far more so than my sister was. In my sister's 20s and 30s, she would either change apartments or jobs pretty much every year, never really able to get her roots in, had more severe emotional health struggles. So,
but I think the interesting thing is that when you talk about autism, people think of the extreme example of autism. And, that's with my nephew. My mother always questions that he has anything wrong with him because he's succeeded so well.
But he's hurting inside.
Yes,
the days are hard for him.
Absolutely. So that's what I'm saying, I think, which makes it more challenging for anyone. I'm sure I've worked with people that have autism in my office and had no idea in all these 40 years that I worked. So I think that's what the challenge is the different levels of the spectrum of autism.
And that until recently, it was only certain presentations that people associated.
Yeah.
And that's why talks like this and it being very important for me to be openly autistic in my work, I'm taking a firm stand about that, is so important. Looks like our time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.